Hello, my name is Frank Saunders. I was raised in Morattico. I've lived here most of my life. It is an incredibly special place, and Morattico has a long heritage and rich history, and much of that history started where I'm standing, on the point at the end of Morattico Road. The steamboat wharf came off the point right here, and for many years Morattico was a port of the steamboats that came from Baltimore and Norfolk and went all the way up the Rappahannock River to Fredericksburg. It was a spot of not only passengers coming and going, but also a port of commerce, a lot of trade, a lot of farmers and lumber and other products loaded here to go to market. At one time there was a soft drink bottling plant in Morattico, many oyster houses and crab houses, and just a real hub and center of commerce. And then for up until probably the 70s, all of this across here, there were crab houses out on the water, on pilings. And that's where the men of the village made their livings, catching peelers and shedding soft crabs. And they did that over the water. And the men, they would have to carry ice out to their crab houses because they'd have to ice down the soft crabs before they shipped them. And an ice truck would come from Tappahannock to the village every day, and they would deliver 100-pound blocks of ice. And those men would have to use tongs and drag those huge blocks of ice down on the dock, load it into a skiff, paddle the skiff out to the crab houses, take that 100-pound block of ice, put it up on the dock into the crab house, and then take ice picks and crush it up and mash it, and then put it on top of the soft crabs to prepare them for market to Baltimore and Norfolk. So a lot of activity in this area back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even 80s. Well, watermen are like farmers. They never make any money, if you listen to what they say. But they had to make pretty good money because they were buying automobiles, they were buying or expanding or improving their homes, so they made a pretty comfortable living. None of them were wealthy, that's for sure. And that's the miracle of the store. That's why we commemorate it into a museum. For all of my life, the store was owned by Brian and Margaret Johnson, and Brian really took the store to another level in terms of inventory and stock. It was everything in the store. There was a pot-bellied coal stove that stood where this stove is now. There was always a bucket of coal. That was the only coal in Morattico. We didn't even know what coal was. But the store always had a coal-burning stove. There were benches that lined both sides of the open area of the store. And every weeknight, those benches were lined with all the men in the village. After dinner, they would get cleaned up after work, come down to the store, socialize, eat peanuts and drink Cokes, and tell lies for 2 hours and go home. And then in the winter, when oyster season was in, then you had to deal with the freezing cold, the river being frozen over. All of that affected income, and when you didn't have income, you depended on whoever owned the store to carry you. They had a little journal back behind that counter right beside the cash register, and you would buy something, instead of paying for it, they would make an entry in your journal. And when you had money, you'd pay the storekeeper, and many times he didn't get paid. I can remember Brian saying when somebody would die in the village, he would tear the journal page out of the book, ball it up and throw it in the trash can, and he'd always say, "Jesus paid it all." This window would be elevated on Thursday morning, and the tractor trailer would roll in with Brian's weekly order. And they would roll a conveyor belt down this window, and then Brian would offload his groceries and dry goods and put them away in various places in the store. And it was kind of a standing joke. You could come to the store any morning and joke around with Brian and have a good time, but you did not come on Thursday morning. That was grocery day, so you just stayed out of his way. And then this meat counter over here, Brian cut up in his lifetime tons of chicken. And he had a cutting block on the back side of this meat case, and he would cut up chickens, whole chickens, for families, because people would leave grocery orders and he would fill them and deliver them. And a lot of the families would order 4 and 5 chickens at a time, and he would cut those up and wrap them up in white wrapping paper and deliver them as part of their grocery order. And then
If the store was the center of Morattico's commercial and social life, the Rappahannock River provided its sustenance. For without the river, there would have been no money to spend at the store or anywhere else. And in those days, the river provided many different ways to earn a living.
Well, a lot of people used crab traps to catch peelers, and then they would put them in floats, and when they shed into a soft crab, they would harvest them. And a lot of people made their living that way. Those same people tend to be the ones that would oyster. Then there were other people like Bitsy's father and uncle who would take fishing parties out on their boats to make extra money. There were some people in the village who were in the lumber business. There were some people, a lot of people worked at the crab house at the other point we talked about earlier. My father, for one, he never worked in the river, he always worked at the crab house. And the way the crab house worked, the crab pickers would come in at 3 a.m. and they would start picking crabs, and they would pick anywhere from 15 to 20 tons of hard crabs a day. And they would do that 5 days a week. And then in the afternoons, after they left and the crab house was cleaned up, then the crabs, the actual hard crabs themselves, would come in by boat, by truck, and then they would be cooked in the cookers every afternoon to get ready for the next day's picking. So your work day, my dad would go to work at 1 a.m. to get things ready for the pickers. Then they would pick crabs from 3 in the morning until about noon. Then they would go home, we'd clean up, we'd go home, get some lunch, come back at 2, and we'd cook crabs from 2 till 6. And then you'd start all over again the next morning at between 1 and 3 o'clock. So it was a long, hard day.
How old were you when you started picking crabs?
Well, I started picking crabs at 16.
16.
Crack claw.
Crack claw.
The girl, the mothers,
I started crack claw.
they tell me, now they didn't tell you because they were there, but they tell me that mothers used to bring the kids to with them, and the kids cracked claws
That's right.
while the parents worked until they got old enough. Was that right?
That's right.
To pick crabs.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And they helped to make enough money to keep them
We won't
going.
make no money because we won't pay in there.
The ladies I interviewed represented the crab pickers, and there were somewhere between 75 and 80 of these women who came from Richmond County all over Upper Lancaster. They were bussed in here by buses and vans that the crab house owned, and some people would drive. And that's how they'd make their living, is picking crabs, and they were very good at it. And the environment in the crab house was a very interesting social situation in itself, because each group of pickers had their own table, and they picked at that table and no place else. It could be one family or it could be one group of friends, but nobody dared to intrude in someone else's picking space.
The bonds of shared work were indeed deep in Morattico's culture. So too were the bonds of family and friendship, which contributed over the years to the village's strength.
John Walters and Sam Parks were Tangiermen who came to Morattico in the summer of 1933. They had visited Morattico in the winter as oystermen from Tangier. Tangier's men would often migrate to the tidal rivers to harvest oysters in the winter, and they'd live on their boats. John and Sam came up with the idea that no one on this river knew how to shed soft crabs. So in the summer of 1933, they set up on Mulberry Creek and shed soft crabs for the first time in the history of this river and commercially sold them. That same summer, their families' homes were devastated on Tangier by the great August storm. And the following year, 1934, John, his wife, and two sons, his daughter, Etta, was already married to Russell Pruitt on Tangier. They also came. Sam Parks and his wife came. David and Tavy Parks and all of her family came, along with Flora and Graydon Parks and Bill. And it was in 1934 that the Tangier migration took place to Morattico. And in many ways, that migration and the meshing of the Tangier and the Western Shoreman culture really helped mold Morattico into the unique place it really is.
This life on the water produced a uniquely American character in the men and women who lived and still live in Morattico, and the village is blessed with their continued presence and their memories of a way of life that is fast disappearing.
Sebo Brumley, Cecil, actually is my cousin. He's as much Morattico as Morattico can get. His family, the Brumleys and the Brewers, are as intertwined in the history of Morattico as the dirt that's here. And Sebo's father was a farmer, lived up past Norwood Church. Sebo's been a waterman all his life. He and his wife Ann have lived here since they were married.
I can remember not too much. I was maybe 4, 5 years old, maybe, possibly. I remember going out there with my father and, and standing on the dock in the pier, watching it come in and unload. And they didn't pick up anything freight to go back. They come back from after they've been up to Fredericksburg. Then they pick up the freight to carry the Baltimore all the way there.
Margaret Hart grew up right across the street from the store, the museum. She's a great lady and a real ambassador to Morattico. And her dad worked at the Crab House, was the bookkeeper there. Her mother was the postmaster for many years. Her grandmother was the postmaster before that. The Glenn family is deeply entrenched in the history of Morattico, and Marty is very much a part of that.
And the summer was wonderful. I loved to be outdoors. I loved to soft crab. And from the time I could walk, I think I had a net and I was out in the water looking for crabs. And I did that all along. For all my life, I would do it right now if I thought I could get one out there.
Well, Marty, a lot of people that are going to be seeing this really don't understand that because it's such a part of the past. Share with people how that worked.
Well, the way I did, I had 2 ways of doing it. I had a crab net, which is a net at the end of a long pole. And when I started, I was so little that I had a very short pole. When I stopped, I was about 35. For my birthday, my 35th birthday, Mother gave me a little crab float that I could pull behind me. But I would go out with this net and I would poke in the grass. And in that day, you could see to the bottom of the, you could see the bottom of the river. And it was very healthy. And there was a lot of grass. And the grass was cleansed and gave the crabs a place to hide. I would catch these crabs and then I would sell them. And I was always saving money to go to college. And one of the greatest disappointments of my life, I had caught quite a few crabs. I had 9 or 10 soft crabs, and I poled my little skiff out to the crab houses that were built up on stilts offshore, and nobody was there. They had gone home to lunch, a nap or something, so I put my crabs in the shade in this bucket of water that I had, and you can tell what happened after that because crabs don't live in the water. If I had not put them in water, they would have lived. So I kept waiting for my money. I thought certainly I would get 15 or 20 cents. And I guess it was Captain John Walters. He said, "Don't you know better than that? They're just dead crabs, and no, you don't get anything." And I was heartbroken, and I still remember it, and I'm sure that I was about 6 or 7 years old.
Bill Parks is one of the original Tangiermen who migrated to Morattico from Tangier in 1934 after the Great August Storm of 1933. He came here as a young boy with his mother and father, Bill and Flora Parks. He's lived here all of his life. Well, I remember as a kid, there were workboats everywhere.
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 They come in this river from Potomac River, Tangier, Eastern Shore.
And when the hurricane hit, a lot of the workboats got washed up on shore.
Yeah.
And how did y'all get them back in the river? I remember the men worked together to get them back in the river.
Everybody got together and got one at a time.
And what'd you do? Put them on rollers and roll
Put them
back?
on board, big rollers, and roll them down, and put some more rollers in front of them, and keep rolling them down to the water.
Elizabeth Walters and her family are from the Lidwalton Summers area. She came to Morattico as the young bride of Gordon Walters, who came also from Tangier when Bill Parks came. Elizabeth and Gordon dated through high school, married, moved to Morattico, raised their family here, and now Elizabeth is living here as a retiree.
Well, during Hazel, the hurricane was coming, and so I packed the children up in the car and took them up to my mom's and dad's. And Gordon, he wasn't afraid of the water. Well, he wasn't afraid of much of anything. And he said, well, I'm not going to go. You go, and and when it's all over, I'll come get you. But he said he woke up in the middle of the night and he heard the banging, pots and pans banging. And he thought, well, that's unusual. And he reached over and put his hand down, and the tide had come up into the house. And my shoes were floating out of the closet, and the pots and pans were floating. But it didn't bother Gordon.
Today, the store is a gathering place for longtime residents when they want to reflect on days gone by, as well as for newcomers. It holds reminders of the past that seem very relevant for the present.
This is really the beginning and the end, this building. The village of Morattico was centered around whomever owned this building. The store was the center of life in Morattico, socially, economically, commercially. And now it's what we preserve all of those memories in. This museum is a living testimony of what has made Morattico what it is. And Morattico is about relationships. The people in Morattico have always had special relationships because they've always depended on one another for their survival, for their spirituality, for their socialization, for support in crisis and death, for celebration in birth and marriage and new life. This village draws people like a magnet. Those who have come here, those who have lived here all of their lives. The one common denominator they have is a true love for this village. And as I said earlier, God doesn't show favoritism, but I have to believe that this is one of his favorite places.